Okay, thank you. On the batch 3 papers, we'll now take the clarification from the Secretariat.
Thank you, Chair. The Secretariat would like to inform the committee that following the Air Navigation Conference 12 Recommendation 6/13, ICAO implemented a project-based approach considering the Global Air Navigation Plan to better support SAP's development and implementation, and that the recommendations from the conference in this regard will be considered in the improvement of this process. To this end, ICAO is developing implementation strategies as presented at Committee B, Agenda Item 7.3. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. The floor is now open for discussion. Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to be the first one to speak on this batch. On Working Paper 292 from IBAC, we fully support the recommendation for ICAO to look more closely at the readiness of states to implement proposed changes and the effort and timescales required. The recent Spence ATM Amendment 7A is an example where a more comprehensive impact analysis would have determined a more suitable implementation timescale. Further, we strongly support also the IATA Paper 297. Again, this is a review of the standards development process and is well argued in the paper. We also support the proposed role for the PIRG in the implementation processes as in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Council. United Kingdom.
Good afternoon, Chairman, and thank you. We welcome the incorporation of impact assessments and implementation task lists in amendments to assist states' implementation. The implementation task list currently provided is a good step, and we'd anticipate it evolving over time on the basis of ICAO and state experience, so it becomes even more helpful to states. Working Paper 292 includes some possible questions to be asked of states through the state letter process, although the examples chosen may prove particularly challenging. For example, states may not know or not be in a position to estimate change impacts upon aircraft fleets. But in short, an impact analysis with regards to implementation needs to be done. It needs to be done before SARP drafting begins, or needs to commence before SARP drafting begins, and the implementation challenges identified through this process reflected in realistic implementation dates. And in addition, we also feel that the regional offices could assist states earlier on in the amendment process, or rather the implementation process. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Australia.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my colleague from the United Kingdom has, I think, summarised fairly well Australia's concerns. In fact, the way the Working Paper 292 seems to be written, it almost implies that the SARP's change is over the line, when in fact it's not. It says the word proposed, so it seems a bit odd that we'd be making states provide a lot of additional information for something they haven't even agreed to yet. But I agree with my colleague from the UK, the work has to be done surely before it gets to that point about possible impacts. Thank you, Chair.
Japan.
Thank you, Chairman. So regarding Working Paper 219 by IATA, Japan would like to support with lesson learned by performance-based communication strategy implementation. Each stakeholder has experienced that how inevitable sharing information and ensuring to accommodate time to implementation and development sorting procedures and any other materials. Thank you.
Brazil.
Brazil support the IATA 297 work paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Korea delegation support Working Paper 292 by IBAC and Working Paper 297 by IATA. Those papers are well articulated the concerns on ICAO's SOP's development process from the user point of view. Given the impact national institutionalizing process and the necessity to improve regulatory effectiveness and performance, also quality standards, It deserves to pay attention to further improve the ICAO SOPs development process. Thank you.
Thank you, Niger.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Niger supports IATA's paper 297 because it promotes a participatory approach for the development of new SARPs and recommended practices. And as the paper emphasizes, there are areas of improvement, and impact assessment should be done at the very beginning of the drafting process. And we support paragraph 3.1 of the paper. In particular, subparagraph C, procedures should be developed to ensure the formal participation of regional offices and PIRGs with regard to implementation of new standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Niger. South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. South Africa supports Working Paper 297 presented by IATA. South Africa supports specifically little c in the conclusion of the paper. The formalization of regional offices will assist states to better understand whatever is being introduced. This will also enable the regional office to determine where the gaps are and how to put measures in place for the effective implementation of SARPs. Thank you.
Thailand.
Thank you, Chairman. Thailand would like to welcome the performance-based regulations as highlighted in the working paper 292 presented by the IBAC, and to allow the flexibility in meeting the operational needs. And however, we agree with the intervention made by United Kingdom and Australia regarding the information provided by the state stated before the applicability of the SARP proposed and informed to the states through the ICAO state letter. Thank you.
Thank you, Thailand. United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States supports Working Paper 297 from IATA, and in turn supports Working Paper 292 in principle from IBAC, as we, the global community, continue to promote performance-based standards, as well as continue to adopt prescriptive standards. Understanding a state's ability to implement is vital to the success of a safe and globally harmonized aviation system. However, in the past, ICAO has undertaken multiple surveys, questionnaires, and impact assessments during the standards development process with varying degrees of success based on the ability of a state to respond accurately and timely. With this in consideration, the United States supports both papers in principle and specifically endorses Working Paper 297 Recommendation A to conduct a study with all stakeholders, and C, involvement of the ICAO regional offices and PIRGs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mali.
Thank you, Chairman. Mali supports Working Paper 297 by IATA, in particular conclusion item C involving regional offices and PIRGs in the process to implement standards. Thank you.
Thank you. IATA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No surprise, we support Working Paper 292 presented by IBAC. As we have stated in other interventions, we agree that it's important to assess the capability and readiness of states to implement changes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Spain.
Thank you, Chairman. This delegation supports Working Paper 297 by IATA. We think it's very good that work is being done in the standard-making process and implementation. In that respect, it's important to highlight the importance of distributing proposals to all stakeholders as early as possible, and including an evaluation early in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Mexico.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon to everyone. I would also like to voice Mexico's support for IATA's paper 297. We believe it's very important to facilitate implementation of SARPs and to identify gaps in a timely fashion. In particular, we support subparagraphs A and C, but we generally agree with the whole paper. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. IBAC.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the operators are unified on this, as I'm sure you would think. We too support IATA's paper, Working Paper 297. It's very important to facilitate the effective implementation of SARPs. We understand the concerns of some states that have been expressed here. Certainly, we do believe that assessments of states' abilities could come even earlier in the process, and I hope that here within the building, within the Air Navigation Commission and the Council, these issues can be worked on very effectively, and IBAC would certainly be pleased to work with ICAO on this. Thank you.
Thank you. With that comment from IBAC, we are ready to sum up. The committee was informed that following the Air Navigation Conference 12 Recommendations 6/13, ICAO implemented a project-based approach considering the Global Air Navigation Plan to better support SARP's development and implementation, and that the recommendations, such as the state readiness to implement the SARPs made by the conference, will be considered in the improvement of this process. The committee acknowledges that the development and implementation of performance-based SARPs is challenging and agreed that prior to adoption of the provisions, guidance materials should be available, impact assessments should have been done, and a structured regional approach to support implementation should be in place. Are there any comments to the summary? Okay, thank you. I see none, so we can close agenda item 4.3. We'll now move to agenda item 4.4, implementing search and rescue processes and procedures. While the Secretariat sets up, I'll advise that this will be done in one batch of working papers. We have working paper 10, working paper 59, 144, 226, and 212, with information papers 266 and 286 to be noted. If Secretariat is ready, we will present working paper number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Working paper 10 recalls that search and rescue, SAR processes and procedures are best implemented through regional cooperation and collaboration, and highlights that the general organization of search and rescue needs to be enhanced to ensure that when an accident occurs, the search for survivors is not hampered by factors that could have been avoided, such as, for example, the absence of cooperation agreements. Working paper 10 outlines that cooperation agreements can encompass various levels of the organizations usually involved in search and rescue, and should ensure the appropriate level of cooperation between the operational units participating to SAR operations. Working paper 10 further outlines that the implementation of the new standards related to the location of an aeroplane in distress in support of the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, GADS, will enhance aviation safety, noting that additional provisions and procedures will be required to support the recently adopted standards. Those additional provisions will ensure that SAR service and SAR services can take full advantage of the new sources of information related to the last known position of an aircraft. The implementation of the new standards in support of GADS will therefore not only help to further enhance aviation safety, it will also provide the opportunity to review and enhance existing SAR procedures. Mr. Chair, the proposed recommendations can be found in paragraph 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now invite United States to present Working Paper 59.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to present this paper on behalf of the United States of America. This paper is associated with Working Paper 10 by the Secretariat. Search and rescue processes and procedures are best implemented through regional cooperation and collaboration as detailed in Annex 12, Search and Rescue. However, response to some SAR incidents and audits under the Universal Safety Oversight Audit Program reveal significant gaps in SAR capability and the need to improve cooperation. Planning and implementation regional groups have a direct relevance for SAR. Implementation of new standards relating to the location of an airplane in distress in support of the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, GADS, will enhance aviation safety for the crew and passengers of commercial aircraft and for SAR responders. Many aspects of GADS are discussed in this paper. 3 of its 4 high-level objectives directly support SAR. Implementation of GADS functions will have a major positive impact on SAR. ICAO has made great progress in creating or updating key documents as outlined in this paper. States need to be prepared as ICAO continues its implementation of GADS functions, especially for autonomous distress tracking. The conference is invited to consider 1 recommendation with 3 specific requests as shown in paragraph 3.1. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, United States. Colombia, Working Paper 144.
Gracias. Thank you, Chairman. This working paper aims to highlight the importance of cooperation in strengthening search and rescue services. Cooperation is the cornerstone for effective provision of SAR, keeping in mind that organizations usually don't possess all of the necessary capacities to address a SAR event. But with SAR coordination at the regional level, each state could contribute in a planned manner with resources and staff. And that would make SAR provision more efficient, cost-effective, and successful. Regional cooperation and coordination would help rationalize resources in terms of technical and operational capacities contributed by each state. Therefore, this working paper invites the conference to encourage states through the PIRGs to promote regional SAR agreements in order to improve SAR effectiveness by combining the different capacities of states and to participate actively so as to conclude regional cooperation agreements on SAR. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Working Paper 226, AFCAT. Senegal will present on behalf of AFCAT.
Thank you, Chair. This document gives an overview of the initiatives in place to improve diligently the provision of SAR in Africa. It also underscores the importance of regional cooperation in this field. The document includes 4 parts, apart from the introduction and the conclusion, the discussion, the Aviation SAR project, the high-level conference on the improvement of SAR service provision in Africa, and the GAD's concept of operations, and then the conclusion. Turning to point 2. 2.1, the majority of states in Africa are facing serious challenges in the implementation of SAR services. Some of the critical ones are, namely, slow progress in implementation of SARPs related to SAR, as contained in Annex 12 to the Convention, insufficient number of trained, qualified, and competent technical personnel for effective implementation of SAR services, inadequacy of financial resources to ensure effective functioning of SAR units, and lack of adequate equipment to meet their obligations, among others. At 2.2, we see the various bodies at the regional level that have always underscored the urgent need to increase the capacity of the states to provide effective SAR. 2.3. With this in mind, PIRG has identified and approved a set of indicators and key performance objectives for ANS, including SAR. Subsequently, the AFI Plan Steering Committee established in 2016 a SAR project to assist selected ESAF and WACAF states in the establishment of an effective and operational SAR organization pursuant to APIRG 20, which adopted a set of ANS key performance indicators and targets, including the requirement to establish effective and operational SAR organization. The 6th meeting of Directors General of CAAs in Africa was held in Brazzaville in November 2016. It appointed lead champions in various areas of ANS to coordinate air navigation capacity and efficiency, including the responsibility for states to establish effective and operational SAR by developing a SAR national plan and concluding SAR agreements. 2.5, the meeting of the African Union Commission, Specialized Technical Committee on Infrastructure, Transport, Tourism, and Energy was held in Lomé, Togo from March 13th to 17th in 2017. It recommended AFCAC take necessary measures in conjunction with ICAO to revise the Abuja safety targets. This meeting further recommended that the revision take into account new challenges emerging in aviation safety in certain areas, for example, provision of ANS, including SAR services. A very successful high-level SAR conference was jointly organized by AFCAC and the African Union Commission in Lomé, Togo from 10 to 12 April 2017. 3. The Aviation SAR project. 3.3. Templates and samples of relevant SAR documentation in English and French were developed by the SAR team working collaboratively with the ICAO regional offices. These were sent to the states. Assistance missions have been conducted as well with the states to help them in the implementation process. Point 4, high-level conference on the improvement of search and rescue services provision in Africa. 4.2, AFCAC organized, in collaboration with the African Union Commission and ICAO, a high-level conference on the improvement of the provision of service in search and rescue in the member states. The principal goal was to sensitize decision makers in African states to the need, among other things, to implement or maintain effective SAR services. The conference adopted the Declaration of Lomé, whereby African ministers in charge of civil aviation undertook to meet states' obligations under the Aeronautical and Maritime Conventions related to the implementation of SAR services. implement policies on capacity building for SAR experts, among others. The conference also supported the commitment to improve SAR services in Africa and making available adequate funds for sustainable SAR services. Also to increase the necessary coordination and cooperation between civil and military organizations in SAR operations. Point 5, GADS. The CONOPS for GADS identifies issues under 4 headings: aircraft systems, air traffic services, ATS, search and rescue systems, and information management. To address these issues, GADS entails the following main components: aircraft tracking system, autonomous distress tracking system, and flight data recovery. The implementation of GADS will contribute to enhancing the capacity of SAR services to determine in a timely manner that an aircraft is in distress, located, and rescue survivors in the event of an accident. Moreover, the capacity of GADS to determine a reduced search area means a reduction in the scope of SAR operations and therefore improved efficiency and reduced risk for SAR operations crew members. In consequence, ICAO should assist states by organizing in Africa as well as in other regions SAR seminar workshops to facilitate the implementation of GADS in support of the improvement of SAR services. Mr. Chairman, the conference is invited to take note of this information and to follow up on the information that is contained in the discussion part. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final paper by France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I have the pleasure to present Working Paper 212 on behalf of the EU and its member states and other states of the European Civil Aviation Conference and Eurocontrol. The goal of the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, known as GADS, is to quickly initiate and guide SAR operations. One of the 3 functions of the GADS is location of the flight, and SAR is intended to find survivors after an accident. This priority is the most important priority after the end of a flight. The effectiveness of SAR depends largely on the precision of positioning and the availability of signals. The previous provisions of Annex 6 required equipage of automatic ELT, which would ensure post-flight location function. This allowed for precise information on the aircraft position prior to collision with the water, in particular with the roaming signal. The latest changes to Annex 6 regarding location of aircraft in distress, which led to the GADS concept, mainly sought to develop new provisions for addressing the problem of the disappearance of an aircraft over the ocean, as was the case for Air France 447 and MH370. However, at the same time, the standard whereby an automatic ELT had to be equipped on aircraft with over 19 passengers that came into service after 2008 was removed. And it was not replaced by an appropriate performance-based standard. In the case of survivable accidents on the ground, in particular in mountainous areas, the signal precision required under Annex 6 as a result of the GADS concept, is inadequate to ensure a quick response for survivors, whereas the roaming component of the ELT provides much greater precision for location. The ELTs have proved their worth in the event of survivable accidents, and onboard antenna for ELTs and the new middle orbit constellation of COSPAS SARSAT has improved the transmission and reception of the signals in cases where ELT signals were not received. If we delete the requirement for equipage of automatic ELTs, that would decrease the probability of survivors in a collision being saved, unless another onboard system is able to provide a sufficient performance for search and rescue. On that basis, we invite the conference to support the recommendation in the working paper, whereby ICAO should review aircraft equipment-related standards in order to ensure that airplanes are equipped with robust and automatic means to accurately determine the location of the end-of-flight point for an effective SAW response following an accident over terrain. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Franz. As I invite the Secretariat for clarification, and as we prepare for discussions, I ask that we keep our discussions brief so that we can efficiently finish this agenda item this afternoon. Secretary?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. The Secretariat would just like to refer to Working Paper 212, paragraph 2.2.1. I'll read out what it states, and it states, the standard for the installation of an automatic ELT was downgraded to a recommendation status. The Secretariat would like to clarify that the recommendation related to the carriage of an automatic ELT was not amended. A new performance-based standard for the location of an aircraft in distress was added to allow for the possibility to replace one of the two required ELTs with an automatic distress tracking system. Furthermore, the committee should also note that the applicability of the location of an aircraft in distress standards in Annex 6 include a 3-year period for development of suitable technology in line with the requirements of Article 41 of the Convention. It should be noted that this period is required in order to give states and industry a degree of certainty of the requirements in time to develop the required solutions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. The floor is now open for discussion. IATA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. IATA supports Working Papers 59, 144, and 226 as presented. Regarding Working Paper 212, I would like the conference to recall that the work of the GADS advisory group that led to Amendment 40 to Annex 6 took into consideration existing systems with their capabilities and shortcomings, be it for detection of aircraft in distress or recovery of flight data post-accident. Amendment 40 to Annex 6, in particular, provided ways to improve on the ELT performance, since as mentioned in Working Paper 212, ELTs often do not activate on hull loss accidents. Having the location of an accident site within 6 nautical miles through distress tracking data was considered a better guarantee that the aircraft would be found. Therefore, we deem it is too early to suggest any revision or complement to the existing Annex 6 requirements. Rather, it seems more appropriate to wait until enough data is collected on the system's performance before proposing any changes. Thank you.
Thank you, IATA. Russian Federation.
Thank you, Chairman. The Russian Federation would like to support the intention of the Secretariat's working paper number 10 regarding the need to improve the efficiency of SAR services by improving a number of key elements at all of the stages of flight. However, regarding the part of the document that deals with the GADs, which at present is presented as version 6 of the CON-OPS, my delegation has a number of comments. This is the 6th version and clearly not the last of the versions, and it's very useful as an information document. However, it cannot serve as a basis for national decision-making on implementing the concept itself. At the present time, the only existing regulatory document from ICAO that has gone through the established procedure for consultation with the state is the Standards of Annex 6, Part 1, which determine the requirements for accident and aircraft in distress tracking. These standards made it possible to develop technical specifications for onboard equipment, which are able to provide for the established performance criteria in the SARPs, and this work must continue. However, as for the ground infrastructure and the procedures for data distribution from new sources of tracking, including the location of aircraft in distress, is left incomplete, as you see in 223 of the working paper. In order to resolve these issues, there will be a need to develop new requirements and procedures, and that will then require infrastructure issues to be dealt with, as well as multilateral coordination between civilian and military organizations, among others. And so we support the recommendation proposed in WP 59 presented by the United States. Mr. Chair, the existing provisions regarding data distribution on distress situations are based on long-term experience. Therefore, the procedures that have been developed on the basis of GADS are simply at a developmental stage and must be approved as per the consultations with the states. In that situation, we believe that GADS is still immature as an ICAO system for global use. And also the means and ways of using it also have to be established and approved. And as to the reference in point B of working paper 10, we believe this is not mature yet. In that respect, we believe that GADS should be removed from B of the recommendation and keep it only in Part 1, and then add a new sub-point to the recommendation that calls upon ICAO to complete the development of standards and provisions, PANs, determining the GADS system as being a part of the ICAO system, defining its main elements, including data distribution from tracking of aircraft in distress. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. UAE.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regards to working paper 10, while we agree with implementing provisions related to aircraft tracking, and indeed we agree with further activities such like seminars, workshops that needs to take place. However, we believe that careful consideration should be made to all current applicable provisions related to bilateral agreements, as they are very focused on state-to-state agreements, whereby such provisions can be actually reviewed and focus more on SAR providers themselves. Very similar to what we do with ANSP operational agreements. Reviewing the USOP state results, it is very clear that states are lacking in this area. We also support Working Paper 59 by the United States to expand the role of ICAO, IMO Joint Working Group. We also take note and commend the information paper provided by the Saudi Arabia, and we thank them for sharing their status and best practices, as well as Working Paper 226 by AFCAC, and support their planned search and rescue conference in their region. Thank you.
Thank you. France?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais apporter une...
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to make another clarification on the clarification that the Secretariat made regarding to the automatic ELTs. It is true that in Annex 6 there was a recommendation to carry an ELT. It's automatic and it is still there. There was also a requirement, a standard, that imposed an automatic ELT for airplanes with more than 19 passengers in service as of 2008. And it is this standard that was modified during the introduction of GADS to replace it as an option by a standard relative to an emission every minute of the position when the plane is in distress, which approximately corresponds to the synodic precision, which is well below the precision that could be brought by the roaming signal of an ELT beacon. Regarding the process of developing standards, I would also like to clarify that the GADS experts did not intervene regarding this last stage of development, which was introduced at the end of the regulatory development. Thank you.
Thank you, France. Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Saudi Arabia welcome all papers presented under agenda item 4.4. We support the recommendation of Working Paper 10 and would like to invite ICAO to develop additional guidance material on bilateral and regional agreements facilitating the provision of search and rescue, search and rescue. We also would like to support the recommendation of Working Paper 59 presented by United States. We think that the inclusion of search and rescue and GADS in the 6th edition of the GAN is very important as it guarantees the implementation of baseline services and the introduction of improvement where required. Moreover, we think that the involvement of IMO is also required to support the implementation of GADS. Thank you.
Thank you. Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. We would like to express our support to the Working Paper 10 and its recommendation presented by Secretariat. And with the only observation that we have with that paper is, although that is aligned with our views, we have some concerns on the means of tracing. We think that the accident position has to be very much accurate, so probably 6 nautical miles accuracy and automatic distress tracking is not believed to be so accurate, especially with the accidents with probable survivors. Before leaving the floor, I would like to support the Working Paper 59 presented by United States and to recall the recommendations F of the Working Paper 35 and urge ICAO to include search and rescue and GATS in the GAMP as a way to monitor them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greece. South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. We refer you to Working Paper 10 as presented by the Secretariat. South Africa supports this working paper. Further, South Africa is currently in the process of reviewing its existing bilateral agreements with countries bordering on its search and rescue region to align the agreements with the template developed by ICAO SAR experts and adopted through the Loam Declaration on the improvement of SAR services within the African continent. The organization of regional SAR seminar and workshops by ICAO is fully supported, as this will sensitize SAR authorities on the impact of implementation of the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, which will have an impact on the SAR services. With respect to Working Paper 226 presented by AFCAC, Mr. Chairperson, my intervention is very short. South Africa supports the content of this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. Singapore.
Thank you, Chairman. Singapore recognizes that SAR is a vital service that requires close coordination and cooperation amongst multiple parties. As such, a harmonized framework with the shared processes and procedures would serve to guide the multiple parties during a SAR operation and reduce the risk of miscommunication. Hence, Singapore actively contributes to the development of the SAR framework for our region, such as the Asia-Pacific SAR Plan and ASEAN SAR Standard Operating Procedure. The best way to ensure smoothly coordinated execution in a real crisis is through regular exercises. In this regard, ASEAN member states have coordinated regular tabletop SAREX to test out different scenarios. As part of Singapore's contribution to the confidence-building measure for SAR in ASEAN, Singapore will also be organizing a SAR workshop for the ASEAN member states. Singapore is highly supportive of the proposal to include SAR as a basic building block in the 6th edition of the GAMP. This would ensure that efforts to improve SAR capabilities is also prioritized by states as they move forward towards a transformed, global, interoperable air navigation system. Singapore recognizes the benefits that it gets will have aviation safety and supports development of provisions and procedures to support GATS implementation. As this will increase ICAO's work program for SAR, Singapore would like to suggest that additional resourcing be considered at the global and regional levels as required. Thank you.
Thank you, Slovakia.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, for the floor. Slovakia would like to support the working paper 144 as presented by Colombia and also the recommendations stated in the working paper. We would like to also congratulate them on signing both the SAR agreements and the letters of agreement between the RCCs with so many of their neighboring states. In general, although all the ICAO member states are obliged under the Annex 12 to prepare and sign cross-border SAR agreements, in reality, these are still not in place in many states and in every region. To inform you, 2 years ago, colleagues from Serbia established an international SAR committee with main aim to prepare and sign a multinational agreement between the states in South, Eastern and Central Europe. This activity is supported by ICAO and Eurocontrol as well. Similarly to our colleagues from Colombia, we feel that the states should promote the SAR operation agreements through the PIRGs. We also believe that PIRGs should guide the states to achieve the best results in their activities in this area. Slovakia would also support the working paper 226 as presented by AFCAC. In this regard, as we support the implementation of SAR projects, awareness campaigns, and coordination on SAR in general. And I would like to also add support for the interventions made by Greece and France regarding the working paper 10 and working paper presented by France, working paper number 212. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Given the broad general comments we have had, what I'd like to propose now, given the time, is to read the summary, and then we'll take, if the committee believes that it doesn't reflect, we can take further discussions. Because if we continue, we'll definitely go into this item tomorrow. Okay, thanks. So if the committee is not happy to hear the summary now, we will continue the discussion, but more than likely we'll be continuing it tomorrow. What is this? Portugal. Portugal?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Portugal would like to express its support to Working Paper 212, presented by France on implementing search and rescue process. As we all know, states have the obligation, according to ICAO provisions in Annex 12, to implement a search and rescue system and operate the means and resources on a 24-hour readiness status within the airspace under their responsibility, involving many dedicated professionals, which on numerous occasions are risking their own lives to save others, even when training for this mission, and especially when in remote areas, both continental and oceanic. The achievement of the ultimate goal by these systems and aviation professionals, which involves a lot of training in very demanding conditions, can be jeopardized by the unavailability of the precise location of a wreckage and the possible survivors. We have to keep in mind that life is the most precious gift we have, and we need to make sure we do everything in our reach to preserve it, even in the case of one single survivor. Therefore, we support the recommendations contained in this working paper presented by France on behalf of Europe, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the floor, and all of you for your attention.
Thank you. As asked earlier, is there any objections to me reading the summary now? Okay, thanks. I see none. In summary, for the discussion on batch 4.4 implementation of search and rescue processes and procedures, the committee noted that there are critical deficiencies in the provision of SAR services in various parts of the world. There were a number of causal factors offered here today. The committee recognized that SAR effectiveness could be improved thanks to the conclusion of bilateral or multilateral SAR agreements, and also noted that PIRGs can facilitate their establishment. The committee noted that the implementation of GADs would improve the effectiveness of SAR and should be supported by the appropriate regional seminars and workshops. The importance of SARPs as opposed to CONOPs was highlighted. The committee recalled the importance of accurate localization of the wreckage and survivors after an accident, as well as the work undertaken by ICAO to adopt performance-based standards for the location of an aircraft in distress. Noting the limitations of current technologies, the committee agreed that ICAO should monitor the performance of GADS initiatives, and in particular of distress tracking, prior to mandating new equipage. Is there any comment on the discussion? Can you show your hand if? No?
So can you just ask them to clear the screen?
Okay, can you clear the screens, please?
Victor Yatsuk down there. I don't know. Now ask for objections to what was said.
Yeah. Okay, can anyone provide a comment on the discussion or objection to the summary? United States?
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I missed it, but I heard several delegations recommend the inclusion of GADS in the sixth edition of the GAMP. I did not hear that in the summary. I'm hoping it is going to be in the summary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, this would be reflected in the draft recommendations. IAC?
Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to return to the issues and the considerations brought up by France regarding increasing the precision of determining the location. And the consequent improvement of Annex 6. I would like that to be reflected in the summary and the report. Secondly, as a regional organization, we intend to plan a number of actions to familiarize the countries with the GADs. And that would lead to a recommendation from the states. And we are having the same difficulties as were mentioned in Russian Federation's intervention, which is that further implementation of GADs must be supported not only with seminars, as shown in the draft that you read out, but also through the development of necessary standards to cover issues that haven't been resolved, and also with PANs. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. In the summary, the third paragraph did emphasize the importance of accurate localization of wreckage and survivors after an accident. And the point of more standards and recommended practices is noted, as well as GADs in the Global Air Navigation Plan. Thank you. Norway?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We would still like to express our strong support to the working paper 212 as presented by France on the implementation of the search and rescue processes. We would like to highlight that ELT, integral and internal antennas, and the new COSPAS SARSAT medium orbit system will improve the transmission and reception in a timely manner of signals in situations where previously the ELT signals were not received. So removing the carriage requirement for automatic ELTs reduces the probability that occupants surviving a crash are rescued in a timely manner, unless another system on board the aircraft offers adequate performance for search and rescue purposes. It is therefore important that aircraft are equipped with robust and automatic means to accurately determine the position of the end of flight for an effective search and rescue, as also clearly stated by Portugal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Norway. The Secretariat will take the recommendation and the paper on board. Okay, thank you. I see no more comment on the discussion. This would bring the agenda item 4.4, implementing search and rescue processes and procedures, to an end. Tomorrow, we will commence with continue working paper 203, the summary, draft report on agenda item 2. Okay, so thank you very much, and proceedings for Committee A is closed for this evening. Thank you very much.